Baki is an anime that came out on Netflix that I just started watching last year, and I couldn't get enough of it. Season 1 is in 2 parts, so I'm going to review it both parts in one review instead of doing a separate review for 2 different parts because it covers the same arc anyway. So what is Baki? Baki is basically an anime that's adapted from Baki the Grappler, a manga, and it follows the story of Baki, who is a martial artist who wants to become stronger than his father, and he gets into lots of different situations where he fights all these different characters, and that's essentially it. So the story of Baki is very bare bones, but it makes up for it with some very memorable characters and fight scenes. There's so much exposition and explanation about all the different fighting styles and training techniques and all that kind of thing. So that's pretty much what you're there for.
Beginning, middle, end. Facts, details, condense, plot, tell it.
So the first season covers the world's deadliest inmates saga. So basically, 5 death row inmates escape from their respective prisons and want to taste defeat. Some of them have to be defeated several times before they actually admit defeat, which is a pretty standard thing in Baki. So things just happen so that characters fight each other. There's very little reason for people to fight each other. They just walk around and just run into each other all the time. We follow the story of Baki and he just keeps training to get stronger and fighting all these different people until he gets poisoned by the end of season 2.
Who on earth are they?
There's just so many different memorable characters because they look very distinct. Their voice work is done very well by the voice cast, and everything is just over the top, crazy, and I love it. I watched the English dub of this show, and it has some excellent voice talent behind it, like Steve Bloom, Johnny Young Bush, Matthew Yang King, Kaji Tang, Troy Baker, Chris Edgerly, and Grant George. Voice cast was very good, and I thought everyone's voices in the English dub at least matched every character extremely well. And I have some favorite characters in this show. There's so many of them to pick from. Like just a few of them are Doppo Orochi, who's this insane karate master with one eye, who's all scarred up and crap and is just extremely strong. He's voiced by Steve Bloom. Yujiro Hanma, he's just the world's strongest man and is just obscenely strong and can just do everything extremely easy. Kario Hariyama, one of my favorites. Very strong, silent type character, a Yakuza boss, and he just has an insane grip strength. He's just extremely ripped and muscular, and he doesn't feel the need to train. He just likes to fight, and he just uses his brute strength. Biscuit Oliver is another one who just uses brute strength. He doesn't have any kind of martial arts training or anything like that. He just uses sheer force of his strength to beat his opponents into submission. And Spec, he's just insane and enjoys inflicting harm on people. And Ryukyu Yanagi, just an older, shorter Japanese man in a land of giants, and he can create a void, a vacuum in the palm of his hand. He uses that to suck the air out of people's lungs and do all kinds of crazy shit. This show is over the top. The main character, Baki, is kind of a bit boring character-wise. There's not much to him. He does have a love interest, but she's not really a big feature of the show. Actually, if you want any kind of strong female characters or any female characters for you, this is not the show for you. 1 or 2 side characters, and then you have Baki's girlfriend, and that's about it. And her name is Kozue, by the way.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
So in Australia, this has an MA 15+ rating. It is an extremely violent show. People are getting beaten to a pulp. Their face is getting caved in, limbs are getting cut off, blood. There's even an instance where someone's organs get blown out through his ear. It is absolutely gruesome. And there's swearing and sex scenes as well, so it's a very adult kind of show. This isn't for kids at all. And in this show, with the sex scenes, if you have sex, you lose your virginity, that physically makes you stronger. That is a thing in this show.
Why don't you punch me in the face? Punch me in the fucking...
It is extremely over the top. I first realized what kind of show this was when Hanayama fought Spec, and it's just so over the top. Like, things would happen, and I would just think, like, in the real world, all right, this is it. That's the character done. They can't go on anymore. And the fight just kept going and going and going and going, no matter what happened to each of the characters. And I realized that basically everyone in this show is superhuman. With the Hanayama versus Spec fight, like, they get beaten bloody, broken limbs, Hanayama gets shot in the knees, elbows and thighs get torn off, bullets are exploded into a mouth, finger through the brain, and all kinds of shit like that, and the fight just kept going and going and going, and almost all the fights are like that, extremely over the top. Basically, in this universe, if you've had any kind of martial arts training or strength training, then you're basically superhuman.
Loud noises!
I love the soundtrack in this show. It's extremely fitting for it. It has fantastic themes. It has very high octane, very high energy kind of themes, and they just make you feel like getting ready for a fight. The music in this really gets you pumped and is really fitting for the setting.
There is no Easter Bunny, there is no Tooth Fairy, and there is no Queen of England.
So the kind of world that Baki takes place in, it's more or less exactly the same as our world, but if you have any kind of martial arts training, well, not just anyone, there's just these unique individuals who have like pushed their bodies to the extreme and are just extremely skilled, extremely strong, and can just pull off all these amazing things, and they don't seem human. They're superhuman, basically. And I love as well, like, with all these different martial arts techniques and all these ways of training, like, I've seen them talked about in documentaries and that, and they don't really have any practical use in the real world, but in this show, any kind of shit that's has some kind of mythical application, it actually has a real world application, and it's just insane.
You can't rush art.
So, like in the manga, everyone has a extremely muscled physique. There is just an extremely big amount of detail in everyone's muscles and their bodies. It's just crazy. It's not particularly animated during fights. Like, for example, they'll have two characters just standing there not really doing anything, and they'll just have the different animations showing off that someone's attacking. Like when Doyle is fighting against Biscuit Oliver. It does have some of that weird CGI anime in it that some of the newer animes have in it, and it doesn't really work well in the show. It really takes you out of it, and it looks pretty bad. Luckily, in the second season, they ditched that entirely.
Well, this little maneuver is gonna cost us 51 years!
Towards the halfway point of the second part, I found my interest dipping a little bit. There wasn't as many fights or as many interesting fights that kept me engaged, and I think it was focusing more of Baki and Kozwe's love subplot that happens during the show, and my interest was waning a little bit. But going towards the end of part 2, that's when my interest was starting to get reinvested.
We stand here amidst my achievement, not yours!
From what I can tell, it does follow the manga very closely, so it does have that going for it. It's a continuation of the Baki the Grappler anime that came out in the early 2000s. But you don't really need to watch that to understand what's going on in this newer adaptation. The story is pretty bare bones, so you don't really have any trouble following what's going on, and they do have flashbacks and plenty of exposition to explain what's happened previously and all that kind of thing. The only thing that might be difficult for people watching this like me for the first time is they introduce characters a lot as if you already know who they are, as if you've seen them in the early 2000s anime, but it doesn't really take you long, and they do give decent explanations as to who and what characters are.
It stinks. It stinks.
Simultaneously, yes and no, because it's a certain type of person that would enjoy this. Like, if you, like me, if you have any kind of interest in martial arts and weightlifting and training your body and that kind of thing, then it's definitely very interesting to watch just for that. There's so much talk about all these different techniques and ways to train your body and your mindset and everything like that. That's actually very interesting. Everyone else, I don't think so. There's nothing else I think that people would enjoy. Story, pretty bare bones. Characters are hilarious, over the top and enjoyable, but outside of their like physiques and training and fighting, there's not much else. And watching this anime always gets me pumped to work out, so it's got that going for it too. So that was my review for the first season of Baki Part 1 and 2. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about an anime for a few minutes. I do appreciate it. Thank you again, and I'll catch you next time.